Greetings, everyone. My name is Leslie. And just a couple of days into the new year, I shared a dream with you that I had concerning celebration. I had this dream for a number of years, and I decided to share it with you. And that would be a Liberty celebration for Redeemers. I'd like to take this moment just to elaborate a little bit further of where this is coming from. I want to lay out the picture of redemption by faith for believers. And so, if you would take this time and go into Genesis 12, you will see that there's a man by the name of Abraham. We call him the father of faith. We know that God speaks to Abraham and tells him to leave his father's house and get away from his kindred. Abraham, by faith, follows God's instruction. And then by Genesis 15, we see that Abraham has a dream and he finds out that his future generations are going to be enslaved. But he follows God and he continues his journey. God tells him that he's going to be his exceeding great reward and that his seed is going to be blessed. At this time, however, Abraham doesn't have any seed. He doesn't have any children. We eventually know that he has Ishmael, but that was not what God wanted. And then he had Isaac. We know that at some point, I believe it's Genesis, the 22nd chapter, he goes up to a place called Mount Moriah. He's going to sacrifice Isaac because he believes that that's what God wanted him to do. And just before he does it, God stops him and provides a ram in the bush for Abraham's sacrifice. We know that Isaac has two sons, Jacob and Esau. The story goes on that Jacob stole Esau's birthright. But I believe that Jacob was necessary. Jacob needed to show flesh. He needed to show man's shortcoming. And it gave God an opportunity to show his nature towards man in spite of man's shortcomings. We know that Jacob eventually has 12 sons. One of the sons has a dream, Joseph, and the dream causes friction and problems between him and his brothers. Joseph is sold into slavery into Egypt. However, he eventually becomes a blessing in Egypt. His family is separated from him for many years. He brings them into Egypt. Eventually, however, they become enslaved in Egypt. And what God showed Abraham a couple of years back becomes true. Israel becomes enslaved in Egypt for over 400 years. They cry out to God. He hears their cry and he sends a deliverer, Moses. Moses goes and he brings them out of Egypt into the wilderness. They cross the Red Sea and into the wilderness. And they wander in the wilderness for 40 years. The wilderness is a place of revelation. I believe the wilderness is a place of relearning, of breaking generational curses. Moses dies in the wilderness, and eventually Joshua is going to bring them into the promised land. But God instructs them a certain way that he wants them to enter into the promised land. The priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant, the word that he gave to Moses that was written in the wilderness. The Ark of the Covenant is going to be carried by the priests. And when they step their feet into the river Jordan, the water is going to back up. The children of Israel had to walk behind the word of God. And when the priests stepped their feet in the water backed up. It doesn't matter what obstacle is facing you. Once you walk according to the word of God, with the word of God, behind the word of God, every obstacle has to move out of your way. And so they were able to cross over into Jericho, Canaan. And then we know the story, how they had to march around Jericho and they took the city and they burned it in the whole pit. Again, I'm not a minister, so I'm not trying to give you a sermon. I'm going to stay in my lane. What I get from the story is that once they get into Jericho, they have personal responsibility. There are things that they have to do. Once they've reached this land of promise, yes, it's a place of opportunity. It's a place to rebuild. They had spent so many years in the promise in Egypt, where someone else benefited from their labor and their work and their life, sweat and blood. But now they're in a land where they're going to benefit. but there are things that they have to do. And so I want to leave off here as I develop this picture of redemption, Liberty Festival. As I develop it a little bit more, I'm going to leave off here. And until next time, be blessed.